What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the new and improved Fantasy Life show. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It's a great day to be great. And it's a great thing to talk all things NFL news, biggest quarterback questions. Yeah, a lot of good stuff on tap for today. But not just me, myself, and I. I am joined by the one, the only Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, Dwayne "The Rock" McFarland. Dwayne, it's 9 a.m. I got some coffee. We're live. We're talking football. Heck yeah, man.
It's a great day to be great. That's what you're supposed to say there. I think, Ian. I think that's what you're supposed to say. But yeah, man, so excited to be here with you and excited for the new show.
Yes, and again, we are now live at 9 a.m. Monday through Friday into perpetuity. They're going to have to drag my corpse out of this chair before we stop talking football at 9 a.m. Monday through Friday. So with that, guys, again, big quarterback questions on the day later. But before that, let's talk some news. Still just in July, so nothing too crazy going on just yet. But with teams reporting for training camp, we are now actually getting some practice clips gracing our timeline, and unfortunately some injury news as well. And kicking things off with that, Packers rising second-year wide receiver Jayden Reed has unfortunately hit the non-football injury list. But don't panic. We have actually already received word from Sports Illustrated's Bill Huber stating that his sources believe Reed is, quote unquote, totally fine and should be on the practice field in a few days. So, Dwayne, sounds like we're not dealing with anything too serious for Reed, but maybe the more serious issue is what is his usage going to be like in two wide receiver sets inside of a very crowded Packers wide receiver room?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he can start to earn some of the reps outside, because last year he didn't get those. And we know that the Packers like to use their two tight end sets as well, especially once Tucker Kraft is back. They've got him and Luke Musgrave. So Jayden Reed, big-time playmaker. I don't think we have any doubts about that. Would really love to see him win the other outside wide receiver, role as well, though, for where he's going right now in fantasy drafts.
Two wide receiver set route rates last year. When Christian Watson was healthy, had Dobbs at 78%, Watson 69%. Nice. Dontavian Wicks, 33%. Jayden Reed, just 3%. So still is the most productive Packers wide receiver. Guess what? They use a lot of three wide receiver sets. Even got him involved a bit as a ball carrier as well. But yeah, wide receiver 26 in PPR points per game last year, being priced pretty regularly around that wide receiver 30 mark across the industry. So Dwayne, you've already done a couple 100 best ball drafts, I know, and we're starting to get in the redraft streets as well. Have you made a big habit of going after Reed, or is Christian Watson still the one Packers wide receiver who you just can't quit?
Watson's still my favorite, but I'm drafting both of them. Even though you have to take Jayden Reed ahead of where you take Christian Watson, I don't want to miss on Jayden Reed either, because he is really a good player. So I'm trying to draft all the Packers wide receivers, but if it were up to me and I could only draft one, and I got one draft, and based on the price, I'm definitely going with Christian Watson, who out-targeted both Jayden Reed and Romeo Doubs when they were all on the field together last season.
And look, I know, guys, ball knowers all seem to appreciate Dontavian Wicks, and for good reason. We saw the film, we saw the rookie yards per route run, but I do think it is going to be Watson, Dobbs, and Reed and three wide receiver sets. Yes, it is Romeo Doubs season as well. In the Packers' two playoff games, 234 receiving yards for Romeo Doubs. Nobody else had more than 66. So certainly a lot of good wide receivers in Green Bay. Pretty good problem for Packers fans to have. Let's talk some more news going on. We actually had Texans offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick gush over Joe Mixon, noting that he is a workhorse. He's an absolute workhorse in every regard. Dwayne, Joe Mixon hasn't been the most efficient running back over the years, and it's starting to get a little bit longer in the tooth, but good words here. And even though he did change teams, saw a lot of money being thrown his way to do just that. So what are your expectations for Mixon? And is this workhorse sentiment just July coach speak, or should we be expecting Mixon to pretty much, again, vie for that league lead in total touches?
I can't believe that you didn't use this opportunity to talk about the addition of Cam Akers to the Houston Texans and the awesome visor that he's probably going to be repping. Cam always has a really good look on the field. Hasn't always worked out for him. But, yeah, looking at Joe Mixon, this type of quote I used to just really file as generic and not meaningful. But based on historical data, we do know that volume is the best indicator of future performance for running backs. And so there's definitely something to when coaches think a player is capable of handling an every down, role. And I think that's what they're talking about here. When you hear the word workhorse, a coach is telling you they think the player can handle that workload. And it is important to note, Ian, that we have seen multiple backs that were very inefficient when coaches believe this about them continue to get the rock. And we've also seen the opposite. Backs that we love in fantasy, and we're like, man, look at this guy. He's very, very efficient. Imagine if he got a larger workload. Quite often that doesn't work out. Those players don't go on to get the extended work that we want. Or once they get the full workload, guess what? Their efficiency numbers don't look as great anymore. Either they look more like that, like a guy like Joe Mixon. Quick 2 caveats on this. Age is a major factor. Mixon is getting up there. That's something that can definitely diminish your volume. And then team in whenever you're changing teams. Those are 2 things that in the data where you showed that, okay, volume always is a really good predictor, but those can be variables that can change the equation. So I do think it's important to hear Bobby Slowick say these things because I think he's kind of offsetting that second thing. I'm not so worried about the team change when I hear these comments. And I look at the depth chart.
Depth chart, as Dwayne did mention, does now include Cam Akers. But other than that, I mean, we're talking Dameon Pierce and Dari Ogunbowale. So, yeah, it really is a soft situation for Mixon to be entering. And I know the initial trade, Mixon for a 7th-round pick from Cincinnati, didn't seem like all that much. But, guys, we did see Mixon quickly get a new contract extension, 3 years, $27 million, with more guaranteed money than guys like Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, and Derrick Henry got on their new employers. So, I get it. Mixon hasn't been the league's most efficient running back over the years, but the only running back with top 12 PPR numbers in each of the past 3 seasons certainly seems like he's going to have another chance to do just that in Houston. And Dwayne, again, the money's saying this, and also it seems like this past, system is saying that Slowick is fine featuring one featured running back as well. From weeks 9 through 18 last season, Devin Singletary had the 4th most touches among any running back, was the RB8 in terms of expected PPR points per game. So no, we're not going to be drafting him in round 1 or 2, but I'm looking at our FantasyLife ADP tool right now, and over at ESPN, pick 29, and over at Yahoo, pick 35. So I know in best ball land, he's even falling, in the rounds 5 and 6, which is ridiculous, and that's not going to happen in our home drafts. But Dwayne, even as a round 3, maybe we get lucky round 4 pick, I do think Mixon stands out as a pretty nice addition, especially on rosters where you've already found yourself going heavy with wide receiver before you get a chance to take him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not crazy about taking him in round 3. I'm probably not doing that. But if he got to me in round 4, which, like you mentioned, it's tougher whenever you talk about ESPN and Yahoo to get him in that range. I love him in best ball because right now you can get him in round 5. Sometimes, like, the guy falls to you in round 6. And by then, you might have 3 or 4 wide receivers, an elite tight end or an elite quarterback. And then you're getting to take Joe Mixon, probably going to get, I would say, 65% of the workload, in Houston. Maybe it's 60%, but it could be as high as 70%, and in an offense that we really love. So, yeah, I think Mixon is a player that I'm willing to take a swing on there. Home leagues, 3rd round, probably out on that. More like a 4th round, I might be back in on Mixon.
I'm currently working through my running back tiers. They'll be live on FantasyLife.com on Tuesday. But right now, I have Mixon as a tier 4 Walmart brand discounted bell cow running back with Josh Jacobs, Rachaad White, James Cook, and David Montgomery. I feel like he deserves to be at the top of that, Dwayne. Again, not saying there's a big difference between those guys, but just the mix of being confident in Slowick's history with the featured running back, the money, and just Joe Mixon being able to handle himself fine. Again, Mixon, Jacobs, White, Cook, and D-Mount. You take a Mixon there?
Yeah, I think of that group, I'm definitely taking him at the top. But I want to, James Cook is the guy I do feel like has the highest ceiling, but he's the one that I just don't have confidence in, right? Obviously, David Montgomery is lower because we've got to deal with Jahmyr Gibbs. But James Cook, I do feel like, Ian, in a PPR, half PPR format, like he just does things as far as his ability as a receiver. I know, guys, he dropped like 4 touchdown passes. The thing you have to remember is how many running backs in the league can actually put themselves in a position to get those sort of targets from a guy like Josh Allen? And the answer is not very many. So I still look at, the role that we get with James Cook. If he somehow were to get like 60% of the rushing attempts, last year he was right around 50%, and they used him on all pass downs. That was the weird thing about James Cook last year. It's like, well, we're just going to use him on the few of the passing down plays. If they were willing to use him more often on the passing downs, given the fact that Stephon Diggs is gone, I feel like there's a lot of room there. And in fact, 31% targets per route run over the last 2 seasons on plays. Small sample alert, guys, on plays without Stephon Diggs on the field. So when I look at James Cook, I still feel like there's this huge untapped potential in the receiving game.
Cook is one of those guys where we could be sitting here, Sunday night after week one going, he had 8
Yes.
targets in this offense. Why did we wait so long to take him
140
back in,
yards, 2 touchdowns.
yeah,
Yes, it
my
could
God.
happen.
So, yeah, we can say that about a lot of players, just speculating before the season. But with Cook, again, saw what he did the second half of the season when Joe Brady took over. I do understand where you're coming from with that one, Dwayne. Other, quote unquote key relative, I guess, to July news item I want to talk about is Chiefs first round rookie wide receiver, the fastest man alive, or at least in NFL combine history. Xavier Worthy hauled in a objectively sweet long touchdown from Patrick Mahomes. I mean, I know we just take kind of Mahomes' arm talent for granted at this point, but still is wild to see the man rolling out to his left, stop, flip the hips, and launch that thing 60 yards downfield. And kudos to Worthy for making the nice over the field catch. So honestly, from the beat reporters, we heard that Worthy had repetition after repetition after repetition with the first team offense. Also know that he did well with the workload, running a variety of routes, short, intermediate, and deep throughout Sunday's practice, catching the majority of targets he received from Patrick Mahomes. So, Dwayne, again, look, guys are going to score touchdowns in the offseason. We could not go more than a day last offseason without getting Justin Ross hype from this very same beat. But it sounds like Worthy, particularly with the impending Rashee Rice suspension, is going to have a chance to start from day one, which isn't a given for a lot of rookies. And if we are expecting a bit of a return to form from Mahomes and his Chiefs offense as a whole, might not be too long where we're saying, yeah, that's a wide receiver 2 in Fantasyland.
Yeah, and I could see some people getting concerned about the fact that, well, Andy Reid hasn't really used, his rookies. It took a while for Rashee Rice to get going last year. Sky Moore, that never happened. But I think a lot of that, Ian, really goes back more to just, the players. When I look at Xavier Worthy, no freshman that came out in this rookie class, which is loaded, none of them had a better season than Worthy as a freshman, right? So this was a guy that at a very young age exploded. He's a guy that can attack all levels of the field whenever you watch him on film. The data also supports that. 25% of his targets came behind the line of scrimmage, so he's a guy that you can get involved in these quick little hit plays to let him run after the catch. Some people look at that as a negative, Ian, but I look at that as, okay, great. As long as you showed you have those other elements in your game, it's something that I want to buy into because we know, especially with a guy like Andy Reid, he's going to design a lot of really cool looks for you. The other thing is 28% of his looks came 20 yards down the field. Now, not all those turn into catches. You have to have a quarterback that can hit you on those plays, but the intent is there. Xavier Worthy is beating his player opposite of him quite often. So this year, when the Chiefs get those, single high looks, which you don't get that often in the NFL anymore, but whenever they decide to try to take away the underneath stuff with Kelsey or with, Rashee Rice, and they want to try to stop the gimmick plays, Patrick Mahomes actually is going to have multiple weapons that can beat you down the field. Hollywood Brown on the other side. So also going to be really hard to just focus in on Xavier Worthy. But man, one final thing on him in his college profile that I love, a 32% targets per route run against man coverage.
Ooh.
Okay, like that's the biggest thing you would worry about with him is you see a smaller player. Now, they put him in motion a lot. They moved him around, but I think Andy Reid will still do some of those things too. A little bit of a question, can he just line up on the line of scrimmage and beat press coverage against the better corners in the league? But that's a question really for any rookie. But a lot of people will point to Xavier Worthy's size. But I just want to point out that this is a guy that really won at every level of the field. And yards after the catch, man. 2.2 over expected based on where he was targeted in his college career. That's one of the best marks in the class too. So the guy can do everything. He can hit you at every area of the field. When the ball's in his hands, he can turn it into a touchdown at any moment.
One of the coolest things you've said this offseason, Dwayne, amongst many things, but just the idea that wide receivers historically have gotten 55% more PPR points when they have been in motion at the snap. Chiefs last year, one of, I believe, only 4 offenses to use pre-snap shifter motion on at least 70% of those snaps would make a lot of sense, especially during the probably inevitable Rashee Rice suspension that we see Worthy being used more in that role. So yeah, only 6 total receptions on passes thrown 20 plus yards downfield in 2023 at Texas. Their quarterback is Quinn Ewers. We could hear the guy's name in the first round next year. I don't want to make it out to be like he's some complete scrub, like it tends to kind of go around online. But yeah, Texas, despite all that last year, just a 40% catchable deep ball rate. That was 53rd among 70 qualified Power 5 teams. So at a minimum, guys, I do not think Patrick Mahomes is going to be ranking 30th among 30 qualified quarterbacks in average target depth. Again, maybe we see safety start taking a page out of that, 2017 Browns Browns playbook when Greg Williams was making Jabril Peppers stand freaking 30 yards behind the line of scrimmage each and every snap. So good stuff there, and looking forward to, again, this new and improved Chiefs offense. Final note, guys, just a quick one, but happy retirement to Kenyan Drake, the longtime Dolphins and then Cardinals running back, skipped around on a few other teams as well, is officially retired. So obviously probably most well known at this point for his part in the Miami Miracle. Gronk just couldn't quite get that angle. But yeah, Dwayne, for a time, man, at fantasy, I don't want to say superstar, but he had his stretches, particularly when he was originally traded to the Cardinals, helped a lot of people win their fantasy championships in 2019 with RB1 and RB3 finishes in week 15 and 16 when it counted most. So any final thoughts on the great Kenyan Drake?
Look, I think you hit most of it, but was one of these guys that could catch passes out of the backfield. He could also do it on the ground. So a lot of versatility in his game. The thing I remember the most, Ian, was he got traded from Miami to Arizona, and me thinking in the rankings that week, talking about things being like, yeah, this is in 2019. We need to really temper our expectations. Comes out with 15 attempts for 110 yards, 4 catches for 52 yards. I mean, the dude just absolutely blew up, had a rushing touchdown. And then he also he didn't have a receiving touchdown that game, but he did have a rushing touchdown. So like right away was immediately implemented into Cliff Kingsbury's game plan for the Cardinals. So I'll never forget that game. But I also remember the following year, I think he was a round 2 fantasy pick, and that didn't work out very well.
It is funny how, again, some of these second half booms don't always turn into, major production next season. Not saying this is a mere white slander, guys, but just keep an eye on how that goes sometimes. But all right, guys, before we get going into some of these fantasy quarterback questions, now I want to give a shout out to our friends over at Mike's Hard Lemonade. Hey, Fantasy Life fans, let me ask you a question. Was your day hard enough for a Mike's Hard Lemonade? Maybe not yet. It is 9:15 a.m., but potentially later. Are you in a slow draft that just won't end? Were you one pick away from the perfect quarterback wide receiver stack but got sniped? Living the fantasy life is hard, but Mike's Hard Lemonade is the reward for a hard-earned thirst. Reward yourself today. Go to www.mikeshard.com to find out where you can get Mike's nearest you. Hard days deserve a hard lemonade. All right, guys, it is quarterback week here. So our main topic of each show is going to be centered around the signal callers that obviously lead our real life teams and even our fantasy teams as well to all that success. So Dwayne got 6 big ones on the way, and there are also 6 big quarterbacks that tend to be at the top of most ranks. So let's ask the hard question. Which one do you think has the best chance of busting in 2024 relative to where they're going in drafts? So when I'm talking that big 6, I mean Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Anthony Richardson, and CJ Stroud. So again, sometimes depending on the format, you see Joe Burrow or Kyler Murray or even Dak Prescott starting to get close to this. But again, Allen, Hurts, Lamar, Mahomes, Richardson, Stroud. Which one are you, Dwayne McFarland, most worried about busting in 2024?
Yeah, in the multiple choice world of testing, I was always let's do process of elimination first. Josh Allen, we're not worried about just because, yeah, he's dog. Okay. Jalen Hurts, dog. We've seen it multiple times. Lamar Jackson, dog. We've seen it. Patrick Mahomes, obviously, dog. So it's down to Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud. I think that's the two that you're looking at. From an injury perspective, I worry more about Anthony Richardson, but we're not good at predicting injuries. So I actually lean to it being CJ Stroud just because he is, of this group, the one that's the most dependent purely on pocket passing. Now, am I really that worried about it? No, they added Stephon Diggs to go with Tank Dell. We've got Nico Collins, who just got his big contract for good reason. I mean, this is a loaded offense. We already talked about the playmaker earlier, Bobby Slowick. We really like him. So all things point to greatness for CJ Stroud this season. But we know for these pocket passers to really do well, they've got to hit the sweet spot on the touchdowns per pass attempt. And that's a wild card. We never know really what that's going to look like. I mean, if you can hit that elite year where suddenly you get 6.5%, 7%, you can beat out some of the better dual threat rushing quarterbacks. But if you have a typical NFL season, somewhere between 4.5% and 5%, it's going to be tough to beat these guys that can run and use their legs more. So I would lean towards CJ Stroud, but I think it is close just because there is some injury risk with Anthony Richardson. And as much as we can't predict injuries, I think if we had to choose, we would say, yes, Anthony Richardson. I'm more worried about him getting injured than CJ Stroud based on his history with his shoulder, not just in the NFL, but going back to college.
And even though it was a brief NFL experience, man, let's face it, it wasn't like Richardson was going out there preserving his body a la a Kyler
Yeah.
Murray sort of player. So I understand Richardson kind of looks like he ate Kyler Murray out there. Like he is a massive human being. But my God, the first game of the season when he initially got that concussion and got checked out for it, it was like back-to-back plays of him just trying to go head on with a linebacker. And hey, guess what? Dude is good enough to win that battle a lot of the time, but maybe it doesn't always help him win the war, which is what we ended up seeing last year. So I'm with you, Dwayne. Although I could argue again, the injury part of it is big, but maybe Mahomes is someone we're getting a little high on. Like, look, okay, number one QB ever in fantasy points per game. Maybe he's going to be the best real life quarterback ever. So I would also pick CJ Stroud, but I do wonder if Mahomes is the one that maybe should be a little bit closer to Stroud than Richardson. Because if you look at these guys and the percentage of fantasy points they scored from rushing last season, I mean, Allen was at 34%, Hurts 38%, Lamar's 31%, Richardson's small sample 48%, which is absolutely absurd. Stroud and Mahomes, though, were at 12 and 13%. I mean, if we just had to say, like, out of this group, who could we most likely get out of the later tier with the Jordan Loves and Dak Prescotts? I think that one fits a little more cleanly into Mahomes and Stroud. So I'm with you, a little bit more worried about Stroud. And I think that's more of the issue here. It's not that ranking Stroud as QB6 is much of a problem, but it's why are we going to prioritize Stroud multiple rounds sometimes ahead of guys like Joe Burrow, who's had higher highs during his short career, then Jordan Love, then even Brock Purdy. And both those latter quarterbacks actually outscored Stroud in Fantasyland last year. So, Dwayne, when I've been drafting, if I get Nico Collins and Tank Dell early, guess what? I'm going to try to stack them with Stroud. But in my home draft coming up here before too long, one quarterback out there, I'm just going to say, man, at cost, probably not going to be going out of my way to make sure it's CJ Stroud.
Yeah, I think it's Stroud as well. But if I'm playing best ball, I'm definitely mixing them up. But the main thing is, like, if I am in this managed home league, I will say on Patrick Mahomes, like, I get where you're going with it, but we've just had too many high end performances out of Mahomes that he's kind of shown us we don't have to necessarily worry about it, mostly coming from his arm. And the other thing is he throws for so many yards, it does make the percentage kind of skew a little bit because, like, from a rushing perspective, like, he wasn't terrible last year, 24 yards per game on the ground. I mean, Josh Allen was 30 and a half. So, I mean, he was only 6 yards behind him. So I think Mahomes doing a little bit more running. I think that comes down for what it's worth this year. I think we actually see Mahomes' rushing come down some because last year there was just a point in the season where you could see it, Ian, that he was like, okay, we don't necessarily have all the horses in the passing game. So he just adapted and did what he needed to. And he started, using his legs more to pick up first downs, keep drives moving, those sort of things. But when you see Mahomes get moving, I mean, it looks kind of funny when he runs, but, like, he's not slow by any means. And he understands angles and all those things. I mean, we saw some pretty long runs from him. So I don't worry about Mahomes at all. Honestly, when I look at Mahomes, I'm like, man, with the weapons they've added with Marquise Brown, right? We just talked about Xavier Worthy, Kelsey back again, just got a 2-year deal. Rashee Rice, once he's on the field, like, that could be a potentially loaded offense. And I would say I would be more concerned, about missing out on Patrick Mahomes being the top quarterback overall than I would him being a bust.
Very fair point there. Mahomes, since not entering the league, but getting the starting job in 2018, QB1, QB6, QB1, QB5, QB3, down to QB12 last year. But again, when we can pinpoint the reality that he was working with one of the lesser groups of wide receivers in the league, yeah, I'm with you. Bounce back campaign for Mahomes. So obviously, really good group of quarterbacks. And I want to talk about someone who, in my opinion, probably should be priced with them, but he's not, which is fantastic, which means we can acquire him cheaper in fantasy drafts. That's right. I'm talking about Cardinals QB1 Kyler Murray. And Dwayne, why shouldn't Kyler be the top fantasy quarterback target given his cost? So I'm saying you get to go into a fantasy draft and, like, everything goes perfect. You get to write out before the draft, every draft pick, say within 10 spots of their ADP. You want to build your ideal fantasy team at cost, getting your positional requirements when you want throughout. Why shouldn't Kyler be the top guy? I mean, on ESPN right now, 85 players are going ahead of him. And in others formats, we're still seeing him fall well behind these top 6 dual threat alien sort of talents that, again, I think Kyler has proved he deserves to be alongside this year. So Kyler Murray, the top fantasy target for you at the position, because I think he is for me.
Yeah, I mean, based on price, there's one more guy we're going to talk about here, but I'm I'm looking for the players that can give me that dual threat upside. And, the question you're asking yourself is like, okay, how many of these guys looking across all these quarterbacks could rush for 650, 700 yards and throw for over 4,000 yards, maybe as high as 4,500? And it's a very short list, and Kyler Murray's on that. He just needs to stay healthy. This is a guy that, has obviously missed time due to injuries, and he's also limited quite often due to the injuries. But when things are working right, it's really good. We saw him last year come in for the Cardinals, and he actually had 42% of the carries inside the 5-yard line. I'm not sure that the Cardinals want to keep doing that, but if they give him any, like even 25, 30% of the design rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line, he's going to blow away expectations as far as, his rushing touchdowns go. Scramble rate was down a little bit last year, 5%, but I think some of that could be coming back from the ACL. This is a player that historically we've seen be more around that 7-8%, so above the league average. And then if you just look at his ability as a passer, while it's never truly all clicked, even whenever he had DeAndre Hopkins and he had Marquise Brown together, you could definitely see the signs are there. And he's been around that 4,000-yard mark. But I think the question is there a potential another level with Marvin Harrison Jr.? We love to talk about Trey McBride and what he did once he took over the starting role last year. That's two really strong playmakers. Assuming Marvin Harrison Jr., is what we think he is, I think Kyler Murray, this could be his best season ever in the NFL. And to your point, the price is really great.
Already been pretty freaking great throughout that NFL career. One of only 4 quarterbacks in NFL history to average at least 20 fantasy points per game throughout said career. So QB1 seasons each and every, way season along the way. Last year, only 0.03 fewer fantasy points per game than CJ Stroud. Cardinals were a top 10 offense in EPA per play, yards per play, and touchdown drive percentage upon getting Kyler back from injury. So that was with a banged up Marquise Brown. With no Maserati Marv, Kyler Murray, my favorite QB1 target ahead of 2024 drafts, doesn't even turn 27 until August. So again, just based on how great and easy it's going to be to really fill out the rest of your roster before even getting to Kyler, again, my favorite quarterback target of the season thus far. Dwayne, another guy going a little bit later than Kyler, but coming off one heck of a season is Packers QB1 Jordan Love. Maybe, just maybe, going to get a big old contract extension here soon. That's going to put him up near the top of the league. Certainly earned it in the second half of the season. This really was, a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde sort of situation where an EPA per dropback, first 8 weeks down to the second half of the year, 18th to 2nd. Completion percentage over expected, 32nd to 2nd. PFF passing grade, 24th to 1st. So, seeing Love in the second half of the season, he looked, and the numbers tell us, like he was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. That said, wasn't quite the case in the first half. So I think we can cut in some slack in terms of, it was his first season as a starter with a bunch of weapons who also weren't overly proven. It makes sense that they were able to get better as time went on. But I do want to check ourselves, Dwayne. It's July. We have time to think these things out. Do you think Jordan Love perhaps going a little bit overrated right now because we are putting an awful lot of stock in those second half splits continuing into 2024?
I totally hear what you're saying, and I think we do have to be careful with these sort of splits. The challenge is, as I start looking through the game log, he was really great every game and all the underlying things. Last year, I remember us coming on, and talking about Jordan Love and where he was as a fantasy performer early in the season. And I think both of us really being of the mind that, it's going to be tough for his fantasy performances to continue on like this because all the underlying data was not good. Completion percentages of 55%, 56%, 50%, out of the gate. And then he fixed all that. This guy, over the second half of the season, I'm not going to name every completion, percentage, but they're all over 65 for the most part. There's 70s in there. You got an 80. I had a front row seat, to a terrible loss for the Cowboys. I was at the game, sitting here watching Jordan Love just handle all sorts of pressure from the Cowboys, get into these 3rd and long situations and buy time in the pocket, hitting Romeo Dobbs. It was brutal as a Cowboys fan, but also watching a young player developing and growing right in front of your eyes. He looked really good, Ian. So while I want to be a little bit careful with what's going on with the splits, mention that was essentially his, he's not a rookie because he's been in the league behind Aaron Rodgers, but that's his first season as a starter, and it was rough in the early part of the year, and then it got better. So there's also a natural narrative there of, okay, he's a young player and he finally got on the field, and as he got more playing time, he got better. I think the other good thing here, with Jordan Love is he's not getting prices like a top 6 or 7 quarterback. you're still getting him right there at that borderline QB1 range, which I think is about right. I mean, I think the upside is definitely there. It's hard for me to think of him as anything less than a low end QB1, but he's also one of the low end QB1s that gives you a ton of upside. Like, would it surprise us if Jordan Love at this time next year, we're talking more about him like a Patrick Mahomes? That probably would surprise us because there's Mahomes so nuts, but they have similar style games, right? I mean, he looks like a player that's just going to be able to elevate other guys around him. So I want to be in on him. If you miss on Kyler Murray, I mean, I think Jordan Love is a fine backstop in your fantasy draft. And it's pretty easy if you want to stack him with some of the other weapons on his offense. And I know that's something you hear about a lot in best ball. But look, if you can get players on good offenses that are going to go nuts, I don't mind stacking in my home leagues either. So Jordan Love is a player that I like a lot.
Love the note where, again, if you miss on someone like Kyler, Jordan is probably going to be right there for you. ESPN, there's just one pick separating the two. On Yahoo, we actually see a pretty nice discrepancy. Jordan Love picked 78. Guys like Kyler and Joe Burrow picked 56, 57. Even Dak Prescott going a full round ahead of Jordan Love in more drafts than not. So I am with you there, Dwayne. And I do think, again, beyond just the fact that Jordan Love looked a lot better in the second half, we did see him and, Matt LaFleur just start to come to, I think, a better overall marriage in terms of what they were trying to do out there. This Packers offense in weeks 1 through 8 was just 18th in play action rate. Second half of the year, it got up to 5th. Pre-snap shift and motion, they went from 59% to 71% down the stretch. That was also the 5th highest mark in the NFL. So really good player, meeting a really good scheme and finding out what they both like in each other. Yeah, would not be surprised if we continue to see Green Bay continue to have a pretty great quarterback under center. I mean, what fan base, just Dwayne, doesn't deserve this? I mean, Green Bay has had so many QB problems over the past 3 or 4 decades. Not like they've gone from one Hall of Famer to another to maybe just another. Sorry, Bears fans, for everything you guys have been through. All right, Dwayne, I think you were alluding to this guy earlier, but again, when I say Kyler is my favorite target, if I miss out on Kyler, okay, and I'm trying to fill that archetype, pretty tough to get past one Jayden Daniels a bit later as, again, the potential cheapest dual threat, quote unquote, alien that we can get in drafts. Is Jayden Daniels, Dwayne, the late round quarterback of 2024? Because if he runs anything like we saw at LSU, man, might be tough for him to do anything but rack up fantasy points.
Yeah, I love Jayden Daniels, and it doesn't even matter what he does as a passer this year. It's all about where you can get him in your fantasy drafts and the fact that he is the dual threat type player that we're looking for at quarterback. I mean, that is the cheat code at quarterback. And when we look at Jayden Daniels, 14% scramble rate in college, that's going to be elite, guys. I mean, 11%, 12% is nutso. I mean, if he's anywhere near 14%, like, you're going to get a ton from him on the ground. The other thing, 17% of the design rushing attempts for his teams in college. So when you put those two things together, I mean, we're going to be well over 100 rushing attempts for the season. And since 2011, Ian, we've got 21 instances of a quarterback recording 100 or more rushing attempts while passing for fewer than 3,500 yards. So this assumes that he's going to struggle as a passer in year one, which is not a given, but that group averaged 20.3 fantasy points per game with an average finish of QB8. Only 3 failed to secure a top 12 finish. So I just think there's a lot to like here. And again, that's setting aside the fact that, yeah, he was an older prospect. And so I know there's a little bit of concerns with that, but we were a little bit less about that with quarterbacks. Guys, Joe Burrow, he was a little bit of an older prospect as well. But when you look at Jayden Daniels, he didn't mature into that prolific passer until he arrived at LSU. But once he did it, man, he did it in a big way with 318 yards and 3.3 touchdowns per game at LSU. So while you might be a little bit concerned about the late breakout, the way I look at it is, hey, at least he has shown us he does have upside as a passer as well. So I think the rushing part is going to be pretty much a given. He's going to come out and do enough as a rusher. And even if he looks like Tim Tebow as a passer, you're still getting a top 12, probably a top 10 quarterback. But if he somehow surprises as a passer, Ian, what if he suddenly throws for 4,000 yards? I mean, I don't think we can say that's impossible for him. Are the Commanders' weapons the greatest? No. Like Terry McLaurin, he's a wide receiver too. Jahan Dotson, sorry, at this point, I think we have to call it what it is. Looks like a bust. They did draft Ben Sanat this year to go at tight end, so maybe he can be something. They added Luke McCaffrey. So they're trying to do some things. I think you could look at that and say, okay, there's a lot of questions. We don't know. We have one proven NFL weapon. So having thought of through all those things, like, I kept his passing numbers down. But still, I think there's a chance that he surprises us in year one. So I think he's the best pick on the board at quarterback. I think the biggest concern, and you've brought this up, so you can talk a little bit more about it. But like, can this guy stay upright with his playing style? Well, what's about to happen with the players he's going to face in the NFL?
Yeah, I think my favorite comp of the entire, draft cycle was Nate Tice saying just Jayden Daniels has that Johnny Knoxville to his game, because you see it, guys. I mean, the hit against Ole Miss, I still love the video too, where someone took that hit and then put kind of the sonic rings flying out of him as soon as he hit the ground there. I mean, dude has no just idea how to protect himself. Against Florida State, first game of the season, like second down in the first quarter, and he's trying to hurdle over a group of guys in the middle of the field. So yeah, produced a lot of fun highlights, obviously the Heisman Trophy as well. But please, Jayden, just take a little bit better care of yourself. But seriously, guys, I mean, I don't want to say he's going to lead the league in rushing at quarterback, but it is possible, I think, Dwayne. I mean, I wouldn't make him the front runner, maybe even in the top three, but I don't think you need more than one hand to count the number of quarterbacks that we expect to have more success on the ground. Just look at his final 4 games at LSU. 163 yards and a touchdown on the ground against Bama, 234 and 2 touchdowns on the ground against Florida. Yeah, SEC schedules their Georgia State down the stretch because they're afraid to compete. Chill out. I'm just kidding, Southern people. And then finally 120 rushing yards against Texas A&M at the end. And that's with sacks going against the rushing yards. So truly a special player. And as much as we might look at this Cliff Kingsbury offense and remember the not so great times in Arizona, one thing he really did was lean into Kyler Murray's high-end rushing ability. And accordingly, only the Saints actually had more designed quarterback runs than the Cardinals during Cliff Kingsbury's times there. And that's only because of the Taysom Hill doing Taysom Hill things. So really could see Jayden Daniels again vie for that maybe league rushing yards at a minimum, though. I think he's going to easily clear that 100 rush attempt mark that Dwayne referenced before. And God forbid we see these guys impress. Maybe Jahan Dotson does play a little bit more like he was as a rookie. I think we can see some big things out of Jayden Daniels. Yes, I'm with Dwayne, the late round quarterback of 2024, even if, again, I'm certainly trying to get my fair share of Kyler Murray and Anthony Richardson in the early rounds as well. All right, Dwayne, we're going to play a fun game next called Cut, Stream, and Marry. Now, I tried to make this a little bit more, safe for work. And I got through Cut, I got through Stream. You guys can figure out what those were replacing. But I was like, Marry, that's nice. Why do I need to change this to start? We're going to stick with Marry. So Cut, Stream, Marry, Dwayne. Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, and Brock Purdy, the 3 pocket passers who are a little bit younger than the Stafford, Rodgers tier. We'll get to them in a little bit, and also exist in very, very good real life offenses. Cut, Stream, Marry, Tua, Goff, and Purdy. Go.
Man, this is so hard. Like Tua, 272 yards per game over the last 2 seasons. I mean, the dude has been absolutely nuts. But then you look at Jared Goff, 265. Like, a lot of people don't realize this, like what Jared Goff's been doing for the last 2 seasons. Brock Purdy, it's a little bit lower, but mainly because he had some games where he left hurt. So like once you level it all out, I mean, they're really close. And Purdy, I mean, he has these games where he throws for 4, 5 touchdowns. These are loaded offenses, like you also talked about. So it made it really tough. But I think I've got to cut Tua, as much as it hurts me, Ian. Just being worried about what if he does have another concussion. Like, and I don't even want to go there, but like, it's a risk factor I haven't really seen at the same level with Jared Goff or Brock Purdy. So I had to lean into the injury. And then I would say Stream would be Jared Goff, and I'm going to marry Brock Purdy. It's just, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, CMC. There's not a better offense in the NFL. And we're talking about 3 loaded offenses. But the 49ers are on another level than those other teams. Like, they're loaded at every single position, and they go out and spend more draft capital this year in case they have an injury at wide receiver and get Ricky Parasol. So, I mean, the 49ers are committed to having an elite offense. So I didn't expect to initially go that way when I first started thinking about this question, but yes, I'm going to ask Brock Purdy to marry me.
Hey, it's 2024, Dwayne, whatever you guys want to do. But you mentioned the loaded offenses, and I've referenced this throughout a lot of our team preview podcasts, which you can find wherever you are listening to us right now. But I put together this supporting cast rating throughout the offseason. All it does is remove PFF passing grade, just looks at rushing, receiving, run blocking, and pass blocking. And yeah, once you average those out, first best supporting cast last year, the 49ers. The second happened to be the Lions. And the fourth happened to be, yes, the Dolphins. So truly each offense, each quarterback playing with absolute fire at their disposal. But yeah, Dwayne, for me, the deal, and I do agree with you, by the way, I'm cutting Tua, I'm streaming Goff, and I too am marrying Brock Purdy. So that is, again, something I didn't expect to necessarily ever say out loud, but here we are. With Tua, though, man, for me, the tiebreaker was this late December into January schedule. And it's not just the idea that he can't produce late in the season. I mean, arguably his best professional game came against the Jets last year. No Tyreek Hill, was like 21 for 24, hit Waddle on the deep ball. I mean, truly impressive game from Tua in that one. But yeah, guys, week 13 on this year at Green Bay, home versus the Jets, at the Texans, versus the 49ers, and then at Cleveland in week 17. So we have seen Tua, guys, for his career, 22 fantasy points per game in September, 18 in October, 17 in November, 14 in December, and just 10 in January. Playing with small sample sizes a little bit there, but for me, that's enough of a tiebreaker versus Jared Goff, who has freaking like 2 or 3 outdoor games all season long, and especially Brock Purdy, who also, Dwayne, has just shown us a higher fantasy ceiling than those other guys. I mean, QB 8 in fantasy points per game since he took over in week 13 of the 2022 season. So if Tua ran even a little bit, man, I'd have such an easier time getting behind him. But this dude just led the NFL in passing yards. That happened last year. And he was the QB 19 in fantasy points per game. Like, is there any other stat you need to see to realize just how freaking necessary it is for these quarterbacks to have some rushing upside, man? So, yeah, I get it. When Raheem Mostert is going to score 18 touchdowns on the ground or whatever, it's going to take away a lot of that. But I was surprised to see, Dwayne. I mean, Dolphins were still actually 10th in pass play rate inside the 5-yard line last year. So I don't know that we can just assume that Tua is going to have more passing upside going there. So, pretty similar costs around the industry. I think Purdy usually goes a little bit ahead of Tua and Goff. But out of these three, Dwayne, cut, stream, marry aside, has there been one that you're prioritizing more often in drafts? And as I said, there is a bit more of a gap. Brock Purdy on ESPN going pick 107, Tua 140, and Jared Goff 151. So now more so at cost, which one would you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, if the cost, you definitely need to look at the ADP for wherever you're going to be drafting, but they're all close. So in that case, I'm not paying for Brock. I'm not paying 40 picks, a 40 pick premium on Brock Purdy over those other two guys.
Yeah, that's tough.
The only way you might do it is if you're all in on the 49ers offense and maybe you already have 2 of the receivers, and it just makes more sense for you to go with Brock Purdy. So obviously in best ball land, that's what you'll be doing. You'll be going with if you took Tyreek Hill in the first round, you're picking Tua. If you took Brock, if you took Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel in round 2, or maybe you got Kittle, you're going, with Purdy. If you got Amon-Ra St. Brown in round 1, you're probably taking Jared Goff. So I think you can still apply some of those same things to your home leagues as well. So I don't mind those things being tiebreakers, but ADP would still be the main driver. I will say this, though, like in a vacuum, I just have to pick one, and I don't care if I have any other weapons on my team. It is Brock Purdy. It just really does come down to that price. I don't want to pay a 40-pick premium. The other thing I'll say about Tua, being the passing leader, like if he suddenly does click, and this happens, and he has one of those seasons where you throw for a touchdown on 6.5% of your attempts, and he certainly has the weapons to do it with Tyreek Hill, with Jalen Waddle, getting Devon Achane even more involved. Jonnu Smith is going to be the best tight end that he's had on his team. There's a chance like he could be a top 3 quarterback if suddenly he just has a hyper efficient year and, does well from a touchdown perspective. Would it surprise you if Tua threw for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns? Like that's how he gets himself into that top 3 conversation. So I think he does have that high end upside that's higher than Jared Goff, because I also think that Dan Campbell is going to be much more driven to stay more balanced. Like we know that Mike McDaniel will as well, but we know Dan Campbell, there's really no instance in where he's going to try to get away from being a balanced offense. So I will say there is a big ceiling there for Tua still if he runs well in the touchdown department.
The 49ers, I mean, third most run-heavy team since Kyle Shanahan took over way back in 2017. So like that call out on Tua. And again, guys, 5 and 6 point passing touchdown leagues. All these guys certainly getting elevated. But let's do one more round of everyone's new favorite game, cut, stream, marry. We got Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, and Aaron Rodgers. So kind of going down to that next sort of pocket passer tier. These guys, though, far higher injury concerns. And also, again, we just have father time really come and calling. So I'll start on this one, Dwayne. I'm cutting Aaron Rodgers at this point. I'm streaming Kirk Cousins, and I am marrying Mr. Matthew Stafford. Sorry, Brock. I guess it's just going to be us three in the house. But yeah, man, nothing overly against Rodgers. But the last time we saw him play, man, he wasn't winning the MVP. He was actually going out there and being pretty mediocre in a good, not great Green Bay Packers, supporting cast. You could even say it was a bad supporting cast. And honestly, I'm just not so sure we should be expecting much else from the Jets, one of the league's worst supporting casts over the last couple years. And I'm just not so sure adding a third-round wide receiver, Malachi Corley, Mike Williams off an ACL, and some elderly plus a high-end, first-round rookie offensive lineman are immediately going to take this from, again, one of the worst supporting casts is something that's going to be akin to the Falcons or the Rams out here. So again, not completely out on Rodgers, but against these guys, I do think it could be a bit of a tougher situation. In 2022, Derek Carr and Carson Wentz outscored Aaron Rodgers in fantasy points per game. That happened, was not happening so much again with Kirk Cousins and Matthew Stafford the last time we saw them play football. So I talked about my concerns. Kirk Cousins' Achilles tear on his right leg, not his left leg. That would imply that he's going to have a much tougher time pushing off and generating that power. But Falcons with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, I think Zach Robinson bringing a pretty familiar McVay-style offense into Atlanta. I do see, Kirk playing in the dome, having maybe a worse defense than Rodgers, getting to be in more shootout-friendly environments, so I'm streaming there. And then with Stafford, I mean, we're talking about a Rams offense that was top 4 EPA per play and yards per play when he was healthy last year. And if we go back 2 years with him, Dwayne, we see him throwing for 4,800 yards and 41 touchdowns. So healthier Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua ascending as a year 2 talent. I do think out of these 3, I put my chip on Matthew Stafford over the course of an entire season. But that's just what I think. What say you, Mr. McFarland?
Yeah, so I'm definitely cutting Aaron Rodgers. So I'm with you on that. He's the oldest player of the group. I think you can also argue has the most questions around like his receiving weapons. We think Garrett Wilson's an absolute stud. Don't know what's going to happen opposite of Garrett Wilson. We've got Mike Williams coming back from a knee injury. He's going to be in his age 30 season. It could go well for him, but there's also a question there. Malachi Corley, really more of a guy that was just used around the line of scrimmage at college, and they've even come out and talked about he's not really ready as a route runner. His own coaching staff has said this, so they're going to have to get creative to get him the ball. We've got Nathaniel Hackett there. Does anyone trust Nathaniel Hackett to get creative in a positive way? Probably not. Aaron Rodgers does. It doesn't. Yeah, the thing is, Aaron Rodgers is just going to run his offense. So you also have the Achilles injury. So oldest quarterback of the group, coming off of an injury, I think looks stacked against these other 2 teams. We have the most questions, around the weapons, despite again loving Garrett Wilson. So yeah, I'm gonna to be different. I'm gonna marry Kirk Cousins. I'm with you. I think there is concern with the ACL, but getting to play in Zach Robinson's offense. Arthur Smith is gone in Atlanta. We've got Drake London, who I think has wide receiver 1 talent, has just really been trapped. Same thing as Garrett Wilson has been trapped, in a quarterback situation where it's difficult, to perform whenever the quarterback play is that bad. And I look at Kyle Pitts, and this is another guy we've talked about that the underlying data has told us that he's still good. Battled through a knee injury last year. That was probably part of it. But he has a truly unique skill set. I mean, not many tight ends can do the things that Kyle Pitts can do from the tight end position, the levels of the field that he can attack. And I think he's going to be a major mismatch problem. And with an accurate quarterback like Kirk Cousins, I think that can just really go a long way. I'm with you. I think you look at Cooper Kupp plus Puka Nacua. If Cooper Kupp's healthy, I'm taking that. But I do have some concerns about Cooper Kupp going into his age 31 season. The last 2 years has already been battling injuries. His numbers against man coverage have come down. Now, part of that, again, guys, probably is tied to him being hurt. So there are just enough red flags that I think there's a chance that the Rams are really a one-man show with Puka Nacua and then running the ball through Kyren Williams versus with the Falcons. I really do like Drake London, and I think that Kyle Pitts, those guys are both in their prime. So I'm going to take the quarterback that has the 2 weapons that are in their prime or in their ascending years. And with Kirk Cousins, it's just last year, man, he was doing really good before the injury, 20.3 fantasy points per game, obviously not with the Vikings anymore, but the year before 18, year before 19 and a half, year before 20. So we've seen that consistency to be right around 19 to 20 fantasy points over the last 4 years. Just having to take a little bit of a risk because he is coming off that injury going into his age 36 season. That part is not ideal.
Those were the biggest fantasy questions facing the quarterback position ahead of 2024. Next, we're going to be drafting our favorite mediocre quarterbacks in NFL history. But first, I want to give a shout out to our friends over at DraftKings. Guys, UFC 304 will surely be a good one this weekend with 2 title fights, and you can get even closer to the action now if you check out our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers who bet just $5 will instantly get $150 back in bonus bets instantly. And seriously, guys, this is a really fun card. They've been giving us some, fight night's a fight night, okay, but they weren't exactly the most loaded stuff. But Leon Edwards versus everyone's least favorite fighter, Bilal Muhammad, in the main event. Give me Leon by vicious TKO. Tommy Aspinall versus Curtis Blades in the co-main. These guys tried to fight the first time, and Aspinall blew his knee out in the first 15 seconds. If Aspinall can get this W, going to make it that much harder for John Jones to keep ignoring him. Patty Pimblett maybe getting fraud checked against Bobby Green, who is actually now going by King Green. Yeah, that's right, guys. You thought Robbie Anderson changing his name to Chosen Anderson was cool. Bobby Green is now legally King Green. Absolutely love that going on. So for my money's worth, I do think Patty can get the job done on the ground. Give me Aspinall over Blades. And again, give me Leon by vicious TKO. But go ahead and make your own picks. Again, over at DraftKings Sportsbook, new customers who bet just $5 will instantly get that $150 in bonus bets back instantly. Download DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our code FantasyLife. That's code FantasyLife. And remember, the crown is yours. All right, Dwayne mentioned before, but we are ending every episode now of the Fantasy Life show with a draft, and today's is going to be our favorite mediocre quarterbacks ever. So you asked me before the show what constitutes a mediocre quarterback, and yeah, Dwayne, I didn't have a good answer for you. So one of these things where kind of the, eyes of the beholder, so you feel free to be as subjective as you want here, but who is one of your favorite mediocre quarterbacks ever, Mr. McFarland?
So there's going to be nostalgia going on here, obviously, and this is going to age me, but I'm okay with that. Scott Mitchell, specifically when he played for 4 different teams, but when Scott Mitchell was with the Detroit Lions, well, who else was? Went 1,500 yards and 11 touchdowns. Scott Mitchell threw for 4,300 yards and 32 touchdowns. Listen to this, Ian. This is going to blow you away. There are 3 primary receivers in this offense. Number 1 is Herman Moore. How many targets did he have that year?
130.
206.
Oh, my God.
Number 2 wide receiver in the offense was Brett Perryman. How many targets did he have?
Brashad's father? 110.
179.
Whoa.
You had a receiver with 206 targets, and the second receiver had 179, and we had a young Johnny Morton getting 80 targets. Herman Moore had 1,686 yards and 14 touchdowns. Brett Perryman had 1,488 yards. So everything was funneled through these guys. I mean, talk about a fantasy offense, guys. Scott Mitchell to Herman Moore and Brett Perryman. If you had the double stack, you won whatever contest you were in, whatever home league you were in, anything you did, it was golden. And you could have tacked the one and only freaking Barry Sanders on top for 1,500 yards and 11 touchdowns. So it's honestly Scott Mitchell. Like if you look at the rest of his career, it wasn't so good. But that was one really good season. But that's why he falls into the mediocre bucket. Managed to hang around the league. Did start a few other seasons with different teams. But that was obviously his pinnacle season with the Detroit Lions in 1995.
Dude, I just pull up the team, and yeah, Barry had 70 targets, and then no one else had more than 24 on the squad. So if only
he threw the ball. 600 attempts for the team on the season. 583 from Mitchell.
Oh my goodness. If only all of our, offenses with our fantasy players could be making that sort of ruckus as well. I'm also going to go back a little bit, not quite that far, but give me former Saints QB1, Aaron Brooks, primarily because I used to love playing with the Saints in Madden 2004. Brooks had a cannon and was pretty mobile out there. We had Joe Horn, cell phone celebration, pretty legit wide receiver 1, prime Deuce McAllister, and Dante Stallworth, who with a 97 speed was a game breaker before we had, kind of the more intricate measures added to make sure guys like him couldn't be breaking video games. But yeah, Aaron Brooks, 4th round pick, wound up starting 90 games, 3 seasons with at least 24 touchdowns. And those early 2000 Saints teams honestly weren't all that dissimilar from kind of what we saw with some of the Jameis squads, where From 2001 to 2004, the Saints scored the 10th most points in the NFL, but the defense went ahead and also gave up the 4th most points. So really was this constant shootouts in the Superdome, and accordingly had a lot of fun watching Aaron Brooks back in the day. I am going to round things out, Dwayne, just so you can't steal mine. Drew Lock, yeah, he is my guy. Drew Lock, free Drew Lock, QB1 out here. And one of my favorite metrics that, again, I have just made throughout this offseason is, just crazy stuff happening. And I can get that by basically taking the sum of PFF's big time throw rate and turnover worthy play rate. So no, this is not necessarily something you want to be at the top of the league with, but back in 2020, last time we saw Lock as a full starter, he did indeed lead the league in crazy stuff happening on a per drop back basis. So other winners since 2019, Jameis Winston, Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, most recently, Will Levis, who also, even if he doesn't get good, has a way of playing football in an entertaining way, even when he's bad. And that's what I appreciate with Drew Lock. Backpack, swag, Jeezy. What could you not love? Now, just go ahead and win this job over Daniel Jones. So Drew Lock and Aaron Brooks for me. Dwayne, who's your second favorite mediocre quarterback ever?
All right, gonna stay in the time machine here. You got to go back to 1997, Ian, and the first quarterback that ever, well, he's not the first quarterback that made me fall in love with the dual threat QB, but that quarterback was not mediocre, and that was Randall Cunningham. So I couldn't put him in the mediocre category.
Right.
But it was Cordell Stewart, a.k.a. Slash, for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yeah, I remember, man, I drafted him so high. I was in like 3 or 4 fantasy leagues that year, which seemed like when you told people you were in 4 fantasy leagues in 1997, they thought you were crazy. Now you talk to people and they're in best ball and they're like, oh, I got 784 teams. It's no big deal. But managed leagues, people, I was managing these teams. But Cordell Stewart, I think I took in all of those that year just based on the preseason hype around him. And I was getting excited, me, nerd Dwayne, like in the spreadsheets, like calculating, man, if he gets this many rushing yards, like it's going to be really hard, for him to not be a top 12 quarterback, even back in the day. Now, it wasn't great. He had 476 rushing yards on 88 attempts, but he scored 11 touchdowns that season. In the air, 3,000 yards, 21 touchdowns, 17 picks. So not great, but that rushing touchdown sweetness did help me out. 54% completion percentage. So that's where the mediocre part comes in. And it never ended up working out for Slash. He had another year as the starter for the Steelers, really regressed a little bit from there. But it was just, I remember that was the first moment, like in my young fantasy career, of like being captivated by, oh man, like you could imagine like, and thinking about it differently than it just being a pure pocket passer. Yeah. And me being old enough to be someone that was drafting fantasy teams. It was definitely Slash Cordell Stewart.
True one of one. Before he got that full-time job, legit quarterback, running back, and a wide receiver snaps going on an every game basis. Again, they called the man Slash for a reason. So always fun when we get to bring up some old names like that, and always fun when we get to talk again through some of the biggest looming fantasy questions. But we are not done this week, guys. We got superlatives tomorrow with Chris Allen. Dwayne will be back talking all things tiers, some mock drafts, and maybe even a special guest, John Daigle, at the end of the week. So make sure you guys stay tuned for that again at 9 a.m. Monday through Friday, live from here into perpetuity. Gotta love that. And gotta love Fantasy Life's new premium product, Fantasy Life Plus. Invite you guys to go sign up over at FantasyLife.com, from our draft champion tool to the ability to run some mock drafts and just get our consensus rankings, projections, and ADP, all that and so much more for our tier 2 package. It costs less than a burrito per month. And no, I'm not even talking double meat or guac on there. So, hey, still got plenty of free content. If that's, your thing, I totally get it. But if you are trying to take your game up to that next level, we have you covered with our Fantasy Life Plus offering. So for Dwayne, I'm Ian Hartitz. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.